All right, so if we recap the morning today, our morning focused a lot on domestic mineral security. So for those of you who weren't with us this morning, we started with a keynote fireside with Jared Agan. And Jared really spelled out the White House's vision for minerals, the progress they've achieved this past year, and where they are headed. We then turned to a panel on domestic mineral security, where we talked a little bit about permitting, we talked about financing, we talked about how to make projects more bankable here at home in the United States. We then had another discussion looking at the role of copper security. So looking at how we're going to meet, copper is deeply synonymous with economic growth, and it's a very different commodity to the rare earths. We heard from Matt at MP Materials about the MP story and what the role of, government intervention has been there and what their permanent magnet manufacturing is. We then started to move international. You heard just before lunch from Representative Ami Bera about some of the efforts from House Foreign Affairs Committee to rethink about things like mineral security partnership and the DFC reauthorization, which I'm sure we'll hear more about today or now. So now I want to take you further down the international lane. Minerals this year, we kind of took a page out of China's playbook. And what that really means is China for the last 30 or 40 years strategically began using its foreign policy toolkit to secure minerals from around the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America. Even here in the United States and certainly Australia, to bring those minerals back home for domestic processing and manufacturing. The United States this year, as we said earlier, minerals diplomacy became deeply synonymous with our foreign policy. And we saw this from the start of the administration when it came to Ukraine, and we saw that expand out, whether it was DRC or Saudi Arabia, Australia, Malaysia, Thailand. We've seen it feature in conversations in Latin America. So this afternoon panel starts to think about minerals diplomacy as an idea, right? And what we're here to think about is what are the tools in our toolkit and how do we better use them to meet those ambitions? So I'm delighted to be joined, I tell you this every panel, by four of my favorite friends. I start on my far right with Emily Olson. Emily is the Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer at Vale Base Metals. She brings more than 20 years of experience across global mining and energy companies, including senior roles at Freeport, BP, and began her career here in Washington on Capitol Hill. To my right is Frank Fannin. Frank is the co-founder and managing partner of Orion Critical Minerals Consortium. Some of you may recognize that as one of the public-private partnerships, which will therefore be called PPPs for the rest of this panel, and which between the DFC, the UAE, and Orion. He previously served as the inaugural Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources at the State Department during the first Trump administration, and is a senior advisor to us at the CSIS Critical Mineral Security Program. To my left is Tom Hazlett. Tom is the acting managing director for critical minerals and energy policy at DFC, where he has led the agency's critical minerals work for the last 3 years. He brings more than 15 years of government experience focused on international policy. And to my far left is Sarah Whitten. Sarah is the senior vice president for the China and Transformational Export Program at the Export-Import Bank of the United States, EXIM, where she leads initiatives to support U.S. exporters in key sectors, including minerals, against global competition from the PRC. Prior to EXIM, Sarah spent over 15 years in roles at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency and in investment banking. So I like to think we have a lot of the best tools the U.S. government has to offer on a panel. Tom, I want to start with you. DFC it didn't start as a minerals financing institution, but it has increasingly had the burden of our international financing. What have been DFC's most significant contributions to advancing U.S. minerals diplomacy over the past year?
Thanks, Gracelyn, and thanks to CSIS for hosting this. You can't hear me. Let me see. How about now? Yes. Okay, great. So thanks to everybody. Thanks, Gracelyn, and thanks to CSIS for having me here today. DFC has had a pretty busy year as we've been working to pivot our approach in the critical minerals and other sectors to align with the Trump administration's points of emphasis in economic and national security spheres. So we have been both working behind the scenes to strengthen linkages with different parts of the U.S. government that are taking a leading role on the critical minerals supply chains front. So that includes organizations like EXIM that have introduced new tools. It also includes organizations like the Office of Strategic Capital that have increasingly played an important role in developing processing, midstream, and manufacturing capacity in the U.S. We've also continued to find ways to use our authorities to work in creative manners to address supply chain security issues overseas. And as you mentioned, DFC was not initially started as a critical minerals agency, but I think we've found ways to stretch our authorities and our investment products to help out with some of the particular gaps that these critical minerals projects often face overseas. So a few things that I'd point out over the past year are, number one, we have continued to find opportunities to work with private sector partners that can bring expertise and access to market that DFC would lack on its own. And I'm sure Frank will talk about this a little bit later, but we were able to approve earlier this year a $600 million investment with the Critical Minerals Consortium, which will draw on the expertise and capital of Orion, which is perhaps the premier private equity investor in the critical mineral space, although there are actually a number of different ways that they work, so I won't just say private equity. But in general, it's a way for us to expand our pipeline and have somebody who really knows what they're doing work the problem on behalf of the U.S. government. Furthermore, that was able to bring in another sovereign partner in the form of ADQ, which is a sovereign wealth fund from the UAE, which again is bringing capital from an international trade partner that can help us resolve constraints in the critical minerals supply chain. Beyond that, DFC has been, I think, in a good position to help center critical minerals as part of U.S. government diplomatic efforts, which is increasingly a focus of the Trump administration. So Gracelyn mentioned earlier the Ukraine situation, where DFC, in collaboration with the government of Ukraine, established an investment fund that will leverage the financial resources of both countries to help invest in reconstruction in Ukraine, drawing in the private sector into critical minerals, oil and gas, and infrastructure, while providing returns and then increasing supply chain security and trade linkages between the U.S. and Ukraine. In addition, DFC has been working closely with the State Department in the negotiation of a strategic partnership agreement with the DRC, which was announced about a week and a half ago, and where DFC also identified a couple of potential projects to get started, including as part of a joint venture, a PPP, if you will, between Mercuria, a commodities trader, and Gécamines, which is the state-owned enterprise that has oversight in the copper and cobalt sector in the DRC. So I think across the board, what you're seeing is DFC continuing to look for opportunities to be flexible and creative in how we deploy our capital, while aligning closely with U.S. foreign policy goals and supply chain security efforts for the U.S. and its international partners.
Thanks, Tom, and we'll come back to what reauthorization means and how that'll change what types of things you can do. Sarah, I want to come to you. This EXIM Supply Chain Resiliency Initiative, it was included also in one of President Trump's executive orders. How has it changed EXIM's ability to respond to critical minerals capabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gracelyn. Thanks. And, you know, as a 91-year-old organization, we were created out of the Great Depression really just to spur jobs in the United States and support U.S. industry and U.S. exporters. And so we really sit as a financing agency at the nexus of domestic industrial policy and supporting global competition from a funding perspective. The way that we prioritize projects is really those that advance U.S. supply chain resiliency, enhance U.S. exports, and also crowd in private capital at the same time. So since our new chairman, Chairman Jovanovic, has joined, he's been incredibly clear to the market in terms of the 4 priorities of the bank going forward. And the first is back to basics. So essentially supporting as much U.S. exports going into the foreign projects that we support as much as possible. The second is in relation to energy dominance, and so supporting U.S. molecules going into the rest of the world as well as U.S. technologies. The third is supply chain resiliency. So this is very much linked to critical minerals, but it doesn't just mean critical minerals. It means any supply chain where we have ceded choke points and bottlenecks to other nations, which have negatively impacted the ability for U.S. industry to prosper. And finally, innovative technologies. And this includes things like artificial intelligence, where EXIM and DFC and others have been included in as financing agency supporting the US AI export stack. There's been other executive orders around nuclear, around drones. Exim has been specifically listed on those types of executive orders to support financing for these industries as well. And so these are really the 4 areas that are of critical importance, and every single transaction that we do as Exim has to link back to these strategic priorities. And as you can tell, all of the 4 areas also link back to critical minerals as well. So this is really important for us. But as Tom mentioned, where we come in from a funding perspective, our role is not to replace the market, but it's really to entice the market and private investors to come in. And so the way we see our function in transactions is to anchor bankability. And this is really important in sectors like mining, which is incredibly capital intensive. There's a lot of geopolitical risk involved, long lead times to development, and newer technologies which can deter commercial lenders. And so ultimately the way we pick these projects is, we need to weigh the strategic importance of these deals with the bankability of the transaction. So we look for things like very strong sponsors, credible offtake agreements, as well as alignment with US strategic objectives in order to ensure that we're getting as much private sector investment in these transactions as possible. And ultimately, I'll just make the point that, we are very focused on remaining good stewards of US taxpayer money. Every year, we're increasing the amount of money that we return back to Treasury. We've got actually quite a, I would say, conservative default rate cap that's been imposed on Exim through our statutes. So everything that we do, we need to ensure that we lower the risk of our portfolio and our transactions. And the reason I mention that is that's just a helpful lens to think about how we're selecting our deals. So I just wanted to add that, and it's important for us and our underwriters to ensure that we're adhering to those metrics to ensure that we can continue as a sustainable entity within the US government toolkit.
Thanks, Sarah. Frank, there are many efforts titled public-private partnerships. What differentiates Orion's consortium model in practice? So governance, risk sharing, capital deployment from other mechanisms of financing that we've traditionally relied on.
Yeah, thank you. I guess firstly, the Orion Critical Minerals Consortium, so Orion Resource Partners, as Tom alluded to earlier, is the world's largest private capital provider focused on mining and metals, based in New York. It's an American group. Orion has been successful for a dozen years, and they're going to continue to do what they do. But what the Orion CMC, or Critical Minerals Consortium, is a mission-driven company, which Orion manages, but it's aligned with U.S. strategic imperative. It is a company to advance the U.S. and allied and partner nations' objective to secure critical minerals. That alone is a new thing. It's not just asking the U.S. government to come in and fund my existing business. It's creating something new, and so having the DFC as a cornerstone partner is a completely different approach. Having ADQ, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of the UAE, also jointly coming in is a different approach, and I think in terms of what is being invested in is that experience of Orion and the team. I mean, they built something like 80 mines in 35 jurisdictions over the last dozen years. That's a considerable amount of experience in using a variety of financial instruments across the capital stack to be kind of a leading player in this space. What we're focused on too is, the issue, and you're writing, Gracelyn, you spoke about this, the threat that America faces is now. It's not 20 years from now. And so what we've fashioned the CMC to do is targeting projects that are in production today or could be put in production within the next 2 or 3 years. That creates, that addresses this time horizon, this concern that we have, and because it takes 20 years to build a mine, it takes 3 years to build a processing or manufacturing facility. So by focusing on the mine and securing that metal, we could stand up the processing and refining and manufacturing solution to put that into some consumptive use, whether that refining and processing and manufacturing is in the United States or, again, in partner and allied nations. So that's kind of the thesis behind the Orion CMC. And having the U.S. as a key partner also creates increases the optionality for those kind of high value, big kind of targets that, you know, they're not all in OECD countries. So it's a meaningful, it's a meaningful de-risking mechanism, and having all of the various partners, they also will get offtake and will manage that as a matter of course. But so it's a mission-driven company designed to address the concern for today, not just the one that may or may not become a mine in 20 years.
One follow-up question before I turn to Emily. Is the pool of mining and metals investors expanding?
It's always expanding, but the key is, are they aligned? Are they aligned with the mission set? I mean, there's lots of places you can go for money, but not everyone is going to demonstrate, and they're not going to agree to the same mission that is inherent into the CMC. So if they're not aligned in that way, then we'll go elsewhere for that financing. Again, this is, of course we're going to realize this return, but it's to advance that imperative that the U.S. and allied nations have laid out very clearly.
Emily, as the only miner, at least on this stage, what does successful coordination look like between government and industry for both brownfield and greenfield projects? Because you're doing both.
Excellent question. We love a good greenfield, but really, I think as we look at the pace and the drive that governments globally want to unlock their mineral supply chain, you have to focus on brownfields as well. And so I work, many of you probably don't know Vale, but Vale is a large multinational owned by Brazilians, headquartered in Canada, operates in Indonesia and all parts of the world. And so when we think about how we can meet this demand and the need of every country, we supply 60% of superalloy nickel into the United States. We have been doing that since World War II. The U.S. is a really important market to us. As we think about demand from aerospace, defense, reindustrialization globally, being able to invest in brownfields, looking at how we extend the life of existing infrastructure and assets is really critical. Greenfields are also important, right? I have a huge greenfield pipeline in Brazil looking specifically at copper, and that will come over time. But as Frank just said, these things don't come very quickly, right? And so being able to prioritize our capital, to look at what we're doing, mining, as much as we talk about mining, it's still a capital constrained industry, right? We still haven't come across that hurdle of many investors wanting to jump in right now, especially given the volatility in commodity prices. If you're in gold and copper, fantastic. Everybody else, hang in there. And so I think as we look at all of the tools and incentives, we've seen everything in the last few years here that tends to target the customer. That's fine. But for us, when we look at what's really going to get ore out of the ground to meet the needs of all of these growing supply chains globally, here in the US, Canada, the rest of the world, we need access to mine development cost. That's one of the largest costs that can constrain mines to move fast is mine development cost. Giving tax credits to consumers, fantastic. But don't forget us. We have to be able to move and embed that technology, move faster, right? And so I think for us, it's a pace conversation. The world isn't going to wait too long, right? We see the urgent demand for all of our commodities, be it rare earths, be it copper, be it, I'd like more demand for nickel. But again, it comes back to investing in the infrastructure you have, in the operations you do have, while in parallel looking at your greenfields. You need it, I come from the oil and gas, so you need all of the above, right? We can't be choosy on what we focus on, and I think ensuring government has tax incentives and regulation aligned to be able to look at how we push on our brownfield developments as well as greenfields. I think that will be a huge help.
Yeah, I think bringing that cost down and making these projects more cost competitive is a really core part of that. Tom, I want to come back to you. Critical minerals are inherently yet strategically vital. Where should DFC be prepared to take on more risk? Sarah, I'm coming to you with a very similar question next. And where should it maintain its guardrails?
Can I say we're going to do both all the time? I think the reality is that you're looking at a lot of different kinds of risk, and DFC inherently takes a certain type of risk that the private sector won't by investing in markets or in projects that are not as attractive to private capital on their own without some level of protection from the U.S. government or some sort of involvement from the U.S. government. And you see us taking that on in situations where we feel we can manage it better than the private sector. And so just as an example, we all like to talk about the fun stuff like a new project getting announced and so on and so forth. But I think the reality of developing and executing mining projects is sometimes maybe not as fun. And there's a lot of getting on the call with a U.S. ambassador in a country where the Ministry of Mines has not issued a required permit and asking for some lobbying to happen to help move that forward. And so that's the sort of risk where I think DFC feels like we have an opportunity to manage that risk effectively, and we'll lean in. In terms of market risk, there are situations where I think we need to lean in on having the aspiration for offtake agreements or for market to develop for a given mineral, even in the context of a little bit more uncertainty up front. The reason why that's particularly important in the mining sector is because it takes so long to develop new mines. So we are actively looking for brownfield or near-term opportunities that I think can help to meet demand for minerals today and relax some of the risk that we're seeing from Chinese trade practices, for example. But we also need to be looking further down the line. And in many cases, that is trying to support market, projects that don't have a market today. And so that includes things like taking on additional risk of non-binding offtake agreements because we want to make sure that they can sell to the U.S. So we could finance a mine where they would agree to sell all of the minerals to China, and we'd have ourselves a pretty good commercial project. But that's not the goal. And so can we lean in a little bit, take on a little bit more uncertainty around that? And then again, can we manage that through work with, for example, other parts of the US government, other countries, governments, and companies that we can access through our network to find opportunities to make those projects viable over time? The last point I'll mention is, there's certain types of risk that I think we'll continue not to take. You mentioned during your fireside with the congressman, the U.S. is known for bringing high standards to projects. And so we're going to continue to look for solid partners that have good reputations, that we feel like we can trust to do high quality work. We're going to look for projects that have high environmental and social standards because the U.S. taxpayer does not want to see its money applied to projects that are resulting in human rights abuses or environmental degradation. Frankly, the companies that we want to work with in the U.S., the auto manufacturers, the tech companies and so on, don't want minerals that come from projects like that either. So those are the types of risks where I think we lean out a little bit and we either push for higher standards or we look for alternatives.
Thanks, Tom. Sarah, EXIM's mandate emphasizes credit discipline. Where should EXIM be willing to stretch and where should it not?
Well, thanks for asking the question about credit discipline because the banker in me can't resist talking about that. Earlier I had mentioned that we had come out with this new financing mechanism, the Supply Chain Resiliency Initiative, which really opened the floodgates in terms of demand for EXIM financing, where previously our international financing tools were very much focused and linked to US inputs into a project. This tool allowed us to support projects that are sending offtake to the United States for feedstock into these strategic industries. And so because of that flexibility, the universe of transactions that we could look at just expanded exponentially overnight. We started getting approached by many junior miners, many sort of deals of varying sizes across all geographies, also because we're able to support deals both in the public and private sector in emerging and developed markets. And so really the world is our oyster in many ways, but it means that we need to have a framework in terms of how we view these transactions. So to answer your question, I think our role is really to stretch on the structuring of the deal and provide patient capital into these transactions, but not on credit fundamentals. We need to have flexibility around, let's say things like tenors or repayment holidays or phased disbursements or amortization schedules, risk sharing with other equity providers or other government agencies. And this is really important for the project to remain commercially viable and to receive attractively priced financing. Because again, when we're talking about what we're up against, cheap capital is one of the key pillars of bringing down an overall cost of a project when we're talking about Chinese developers, for example. But what we should not we really should not give up on and really need to stay laser focused on is things like sponsor quality, experience of developing these types of assets, ensuring clarity of governance, clarity of the shareholding entities involved, where these offtake is going, things like FIOC and CSIS. These are all really important considerations for us to ensure that indeed the projects that we support are Western aligned, are of high quality, are able to withstand the test of time. And of course, we are looking for those that are looking to come into production in the near future. So those that have done a lot of the heavy lifting already to get to that point. These are the types of transactions that we look for. But, in the conversation earlier, somebody mentioned something about gold and copper projects. I mean, these are heavily traded, very liquid commodities available in abundance. Our ability to support those types of transactions, you can have a much more bankable transaction in these types of commodities. If you look at something like rare earths or more niche critical minerals, the problem set is inherently completely different. And if you look at sort of the financing and structuring considerations around something like rare earths, I mean, we're kind of building the airplane as we fly it in many ways. I mean, this is a new industry that we're looking to re-onshore back to the United States. And we can't be asking for things like 10-year offtake agreements when those refining and midstream operations are being built as we speak. So, these are some of the strategic considerations that we need to be very creative. We need to be clear-eyed rather, in our ability to understand that these are going to be challenges going into these transactions. And, to the best of our ability, understanding the sector and being able to structure and mitigate these risks as much as possible is what we are very focused on at Exim.
Thanks, Sarah. Frank, mining projects don't fail for lack of interest. They tend to fail on risk. Which risks is the Critical Minerals Consortium best positioned to absorb or mitigate in order to have that multiplier of private capital that we're aiming for?
Yeah, thank you. I'd first like to acknowledge what Sarah and Tom were speaking about, because I think it's pretty profound, and in that both Exim and DFC are retooling themselves based on the conditions that the world is in, not trying to shoehorn in their policies that seems to not be very practical to the current conditions. And I think that's hard to do, having served in government, and they're doing it with a degree of nimbleness that's rare. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more of that on the reauthorization too, Tom. But I think that in terms of the risk, the world has lots of good rocks. It's what is above them that's going to determine whether it's an investable opportunity or not, in many instances. And so I would say we continue to follow. So there's the two types of risks that I think are particularly relevant would be political risk, of course, and that political risk I describe is pretty broad. It can be all kinds of elements of above the ground risk, and then certainly operational risk in terms of the right management teams and making sure that things are done on time. The mining industry, by and large, on time and on budget, they build mines about 24% on time and on budget. It is horrendous. Orion has a history of doing it on time and on budget closer to the high 70s, 80%. And part of that is because of the distribution and milestoning of capital to assert a degree of operational oversight and control over a project. But that's tough to do. I mean, this is really, it's not like you just say, okay, here's some money, go get it. You need to really be on it and make sure that you select the right management team, and that goes back to workforce and people people questions and who are you going to back? And again, so I guess it's that large view of political risk and all of the elements of that, and having the U.S. government as well, depending on the country, the Emirati government being a co-investor helps to de-risk that in many instances, can. But then you fall back to that operational risk and finding the right team. But they're able to be mitigated, but it takes a lot of work.
Frank, how are you picking which project? You were in an era of market volatility right now. How is Orion thinking about which projects to pick in terms of what commodities we're focusing? I mean, the U.S. government now has a list of about 60 critical minerals. And if I had to take my biggest takeaway from panel discussions today, it's like 60 minerals, very different markets, very different needs, very different capabilities. How do you how do you decide what you're prioritizing?
Well, firstly, that time horizon for development, that eliminates a lot of projects, right? And so then you start going into what is a scalable resource? What is, what's big, what's chunky, and and you start doing that. What are the logistics and all of the other infrastructure things around the mine that you can talk about? So those are all kind of the elements in terms of the prioritization. In terms of mineral selection, it's what everyone's talking about. Yes, there's 60 things. Some of those are tangential niche minerals that are produced coincident to something else that you're producing. So, but it changes the economics of that production. But I would say it's what everyone else is talking about too. We're not unique in that. One of the things that we are unique in is, and I think Sarah made the distinction between rare earths and big liquid base metals like copper. In terms of notionally you can create a vertically integrated supply chain with a company with something that's a small market. But as you scale up, it's virtually impossible to create a true integrated company that can do everything. So we're thinking about it in terms of a virtual integration via deployment of capital across that supply chain. So back to the site selection, the mineral selection, what are we going to invest in? We're not going to invest in something that might be a good project, but we cannot identify a processing solution outside of China. That has to be part of it, is throughout. So even if we haven't built it here in the United States or elsewhere, can we ramp that processing, refining up? And do we have an immediate refining solution ex-China?
Yeah, vertical integration from the outset is a really important step. We sometimes think about vertical integration afterwards, and then we end up sending minerals to China for a while. Emily, I want to come back to you. I mean, this administration has really doubled down on the Western Hemisphere. What is the role of the Western Hemisphere in diversifying supply chain for some of the key minerals that we're talking about now?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like I said, we have massive endowment headquartered in Canada. So I call Toronto home these days. It's very cold. And then when you look at assets in Brazil, right? So I'll speak to my own portfolio. I think there's incredible opportunity there to recalibrate the supply chain, but compel partnership. We've talked about partnership a lot today. But when you look at, again, I go back to pace and urgency. We've set out on creating foreign policy, trade policy, governments, the Canadian government just unleashed its budget as well, which is very much tailored to incentives for mining, right? And so you're seeing this all over the world, just like you have here in the US. And so how we're thinking about that integrated supply chain, right? I'm an hour flight away, and ample endowment. The Canadian mining ecosystem has been there for a very long time, and it's much more hospitable at times to permitting and building mines. I think Seth from Glencore mentioned earlier, in all of North America, in the Western supply here, we have 3 copper smelters. 2 in the U.S., 1 in Canada. The Chinese have 200. And so when we think about our geography, our infrastructure, and how we're capitalizing on that, I think that is a really important opportunity as we think about the pace in which we need to deliver to a defense or a reindustrialization here in the U.S. We have strong endowments. We have strong existing partnerships. How do we I don't want to build new infrastructure. I don't think anybody does. So how are we looking at that shared infrastructure space? How can we bring mines online faster? But really it becomes down to that refining and processing. I am a benefit of a vertically integrated. But equally, when you look at the Asia market, right, and I'll give nickel, class 1 nickel, super alloys. But class 1 nickel, 60% of that supply comes from Indonesia. 77% of it is refined in Indonesia. So, again, how are we thinking about this as Western suppliers to really take advantage of each other's incentives in the toolbox? And I think there is an opportunity, right, to move faster and at scale. I have your basic base metals, copper, nickel, cobalt, but when you think about the rare earths over the border here in the US, right, we have an opportunity to think differently. And don't forget the Americas, right? You have an emerging market. I have a large copper endowment in Brazil, and that requires partnership. We've talked to the US, we've talked to many governments, right, about how we're thinking about what that market is, how we're thinking about partnership differently. I look at where we see, if you just take basic assumptions of AI and infrastructure demand, I think we've talked about data centers and AI for a long time now, but when you start to think about that from a copper perspective and you see a deficit moving into the next 24 months, we need to compel ourselves as a sector and as governments, right? Because in the mining sector, to think about partnership differently. Miners, we're fairly linear, but thinking about partnership in a different way and seeing what the U.S. has done with MP Materials and others, and the Canadians have taken some great steps too in thinking about how to do things differently. If we don't, I think we will lose the momentum behind what we're doing right now. And I think the Western supply chain and Western miners, we have a lot to do together through integration.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. It's like when I think about Vale, it's like there would be no General Motors parts without Vale. It's so vertically integrated with our economies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, I want to come to you. What does the reauthorized DFC look like, and how is it better fit to meet our mineral security needs going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are excited and hopeful that reauthorization will be at long last complete with the passage of the NDAA, which I hope will happen before the end of the year. And so I think if you're looking at what that's going to do for us, number one, I hope it means that we get a lot busier. We're going to ideally have a significantly higher maximum contingent liability, so up to $205 billion, up from 60 right now. So that gives us a lot of room to run. And I think that could mean both more transactions, or it could mean larger, more impactful, and more strategic transactions with sort of higher tickets. That includes in particular around equity, where we've been more constrained in the past, but are looking to get a $5 billion revolving equity fund, which would give us the ability to be a bit more strategic in our investments, take more direct stakes, and give more influence to the U.S. government in sectors like the critical minerals, where there's a strategic rationale for doing so. And then I think you're going to look at the expansion of the markets where we can work. Now, some of those are going to be markets that have been on the cusp for us historically. So a place like Chile, which has a great mineral endowment, but has been just over the high income line for us. But it also is going to free up our ability to work in markets that are, more traditional high-income countries, including, Five Eyes markets are called out specifically. And that could include, mining projects in some of the tier 1 jurisdictions like a Canada or an Australia. But I think we've also struggled quite a bit to find actionable opportunities for processing and midstream capacity in some of the lower income markets that we've historically been focused on. So could we find opportunities for processing and then help to do either direct or, as I think Frank said, virtual or sort of a synthetic integration where we can actually help to match up projects that we're working on overseas with those domestically. Ideally, I think we'd love to see some more staff. These projects are very difficult to underwrite and they're very difficult to monitor. We have to scale up our monitoring because these projects struggle not struggle, but they face environmental and social challenges. They face market challenges. And, not every project is a home run winner that never has any problems, and not every project is a failure. Most of them fall somewhere in between, and the success depends on people coming together to find solutions to challenges that they face along the way. So, I think we're also going to have to continue staffing up there. as you mentioned, we're not built for critical minerals investments, and there are different challenges. So we're learning to do the part that comes after the contracts are signed and the project is built as well, which is just as important to actually seeing the result, which is minerals flowing to the US.
And Tom, how do you see this? How do you see the reauthorized DFC moving the needle in complex jurisdictions, DRC, Ukraine? These are hard places.
Yeah. I mean, I think historically DFC has been the entity that does hard projects in hard places. We haven't really shied away from any market. We have, we've struggled a bit to find actionable projects in different places. But I think if you look at a place like Ukraine, a place like the DRC, one of the things we're doing differently there is we're not just kind of picking and choosing individual projects, but we're creating mechanisms that allow for more deeper integration. And so, as I mentioned, if the risks in a place like the DRC are around not whether the laws that are on the books are attractive to mining, but how those laws are actually applied, having a closer working relationship through something like the Joint Strategic Committee that's outlined in the Strategic Partnership Agreement that was recently announced is a way to ensure that U.S. Government officials can advocate directly on behalf of projects that are important to us, so that as there are potential challenges, the Chinese now, they can call up somebody, they know who to call up. Sometimes that comes with maybe a bag of cash or something. That's not how we're gonna handle it, but we wanna be, we want to be in direct connection with the people who are making decisions in these markets so that we can help to smooth over challenges and hopefully improve the investment environment to bring in companies that are of the quality and the caliber and align with our goals that we wanna see. So I think it's both, continuing to work in the ways that we always have, as well as finding new institutional arrangements that help bring us closer to the decision makers in those countries on a regular and consistent basis.
Thanks, Tom. Sarah, how are you prioritizing projects right now? Is it by commodity? Is it by jurisdiction? We see a lot of companies out there, especially junior miners, looking for capital, but how are you prioritizing it from your side?
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to some of the areas that we were talking about earlier in regards to looking at the overall portfolio from a portfolio risk perspective and balancing the risks from that perspective. We've got pretty much every single one of our long-term underwriters working on a critical minerals transaction right now. Not all of them are niche critical minerals, but that's because we have to understand that the credit risk of the more liquid ones will outweigh the credit risk of some of the more national security linked yet more riskier transactions. And that's really important for us. But the other point that I wanted to maybe just dovetail on what Tom was talking about in your question to him is in regards to timelines. I mean, where some of the Chinese financing agencies move incredibly quickly in terms of getting term sheets across the line and things like that to potential project sponsors, this is something that we should be looking to improve internally on our side as well. And so from our perspective, we need to understand our existing toolkit, what our constraints are, and what we can unblock to get to that speed of execution while being prudent on from a financing and risk perspective. So what does that mean? Well, as EXIM, we've got a workforce of about a couple hundred people in comparison to some of our sister U.S. government agencies with tens of thousands of people, both domestically and internationally. So, when we get inquiries from embassies and things like that, we look at them with due care, but we have to be very clear to the market in terms of what we can actually deliver based on our existing workforce and our footprint. And so one of the ways that we're looking to change this, and this has been a focus of mine this year, and it's really accelerated in the last couple of months, is streamlining coordination internally. So we've now essentially merged our origination functions, where we've had a separate program for strategic sectors and a separate program for business development and regional coverage. That's all under one umbrella that I lead, working very closely with the head of the underwriting team to ensure that that passing of the baton is happening seamlessly through our internal life cycle, removing barriers to internal approval processes. These are the sorts of things that are really a focus, but also to triage massage transactions earlier rather than later. So, there's this thing called a letter of interest that EXIM can provide to potential borrowers who are interested. We've now started looking at them from a slightly different lens to say, perhaps we need to be more judicious in the types of letters of interest that we issue, because once that's out there, there's an expectation that's created that within a certain time frame, we would be able to execute, approve, and disperse under that transaction. And so given some of the constraints that I just mentioned, we just want to right-size market expectations, focus on the ones that are already in-house, and accelerate those towards disbursement so that the borrowers can have a check in their hands sooner rather than later. And this has been a huge, huge focus for us. Partnership, I'll just mention one last thing on that point, is also helping us achieve this. So, we had a couple of transactions that we announced under the state visit partnership with Australia, for example. And one of the key areas of partnership there is we were working very, very closely with our equivalent in Australia, which is Export Finance Australia. They've got boots on the ground. They're a market that's GDP is primarily driven by mining-related industries, and so they've got technical expertise. They've done many mining deals in their transaction and their portfolio, so we should be leveraging that. And that's exactly the types of partnerships that we're talking about, not just other export finance agencies, but also commercial banks that have similar in-house information, so that we're not starting from scratch when we're looking at a transaction, and we're really utilizing everything that's available out there to move quickly and at pace.
Thanks, Erin. You guys have picked up a lot of speed this year. Both of you have picked up quite a bit of speed. Emily, I want to come to you. Financing is one piece of the puzzle about what we can offer projects and countries. But what is a better model of doing business and benefit sharing with communities? Because ultimately, if we're countering Chinese investment, countries have an option of who they work with. We as the US, how do we bring that better model?
So I think you start with jobs, right? I mean, if you want to run contrary to a Chinese approach to investment, we see this a lot in Asia, where you invest in big projects and you bring Chinese workforce in to do Chinese projects, and then you do not have the benefit of developing and building that local economy. So really thinking about that, right? I will tell you, in all my experience, ensuring that job creation piece is real. Will be very important. I mean, it all ties, right? Like, we're all in Washington. We know the political constituency and how that works. But I think that what I would note, that what has changed over the last several years, and probably it's been trending that way for the last few decades, is this role of equity, in particularly Western Hemisphere countries, Canada, the US. You're starting to see it now in Latin America, is this expectation for equity. When you look at mine development and new mines coming on, part of our success here is that we've brought to the forefront the attention of the mining sector, which I feel has been neglected for many years in the public policy space. But with that, we have to also change how we're approaching our communities. This isn't like 1995 CSR, I'm going to write Frank a check and he'll be happy. It's really,
Might be.
I would, maybe. I'll think about it.
How much?
Depends. But really thinking about what that equity and that value creation means for those communities. And I will tell you, the thing that when I look at all of our major projects over the last few years in all the companies I've been with, understanding first, before you start this, before you go down the road of development, what is the expectation of that community? What is the demographic? What is the jobs you've said you were going to create versus what you are, right? Really having a handle and going at it in we're back to partnership, but it has to be, right? It's changed, and this demand for equity and participation in mining projects, that is the new forward, right? We need to really think about that as mining companies, as we join with government and private equity to think about how we advance these projects at scale and at pace, is what that role of the community needs to be. And I fully believe in the right thing to do as a matter of trying to think through what that participation needs to look like. And it'll be different in different jurisdictions. I think, the conversation in the Western Hemisphere, particularly Canada, in the US, is more sophisticated. We've had more time, we have a more developed sector. But as you look at emerging economies, what that changing expectation is, for some, it's basic schools, infrastructure, investing in the communities. Others, it starts to become that participation, that shareholding. So I think really stepping back and adjusting how we think about communities and our engagement with them. It isn't something we do after we decide on the project. It should be the first thing. We've seen what's happened in Panama over this last year. We have every tool in the toolbox, so to speak, cliche, to engage with people. That's what people want: jobs. They want to see growth, and they want to see the positive in a mind. And we have to bring the positive to the mindset, right? And I think myself, you heard from my colleagues in other parts of the sector earlier today, it's just a real opportunity, but it's a necessity, right? We have to rethink how we bring people to the table when we want to develop so many minds.
Absolutely, and it adds a lot of durability to these solutions. A big theme today is how do we think about these solutions as becoming more durable politically, socially, economically, and it's a core part of that. So my final question, which I want to 30 seconds to each of you in the interest of time before we turn to get a State Department perspective on this exact issue, is 2026 when we look at how to keep momentum and how to continue getting rubber to hit the road, not just talking shop. Because in minerals diplomacy, we can sometimes get very good at talking, right? To get rubber to hit the road, one recommendation about how to continue this momentum.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say speed to execution, and Sarah certainly spoke to this, is absolutely critical. We have to move at the speed of business, and secondly, China's not sitting still watching America get its act together and starting to have a countermeasure. They're increasing their activity every day, and we need to keep pace.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I guess what I would say is, continuing to engage in partnership with our international partners as well as in the U.S. with regards to identifying market solutions that are going to make it a little bit easier to make these projects work. And so whether that be something like, standards-based marketplaces, pricing mechanisms, and so on, I think we need to continue finding ways to build up the mid and downstream capacity that will actually help drive success in this space.
From our perspective, we're already seeing enthusiasm around how, given ourselves and DFC and other U.S. government agencies focusing on some of the more harder to support strategic sectors, we're already seeing private sector players like Orion and CMC, as well as JP Morgan's $1.5 trillion security and resiliency initiative being announced and capital starting to deploy under these initiatives. And so it's already starting. I would just say let's keep up the momentum between public and private sector in this front. Success to me would that we exponentially increase the amount of authorizations and disbursements that go into the critical mineral sector under XM. But ultimately, it's just not about cutting the checks. It's also about building these projects and the impact that'll have on the supply chains and jobs in the United States. So we're really looking forward to that.
So capital deployed would be fantastic. How we see FIDs. We've talked about all of these projects, but what gets brought to that final investment case, right? Let's put these projects into motion. And really, for me, success would be looking at how we use our allies and our existing partnerships to move faster and stronger. I think diversification will come, but we have a built-in infrastructure and network already, so how are we going to capitalize on that while deploying that capital, while executing those projects? We don't have to make it harder for ourselves than it is.
Building relationships with new partners, rekindling old relationships, it's all kind of part of the equation. Well, please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Eric Paloma, to moderate our next conversation with Reggie Singh from the State Department.
All right, I think we've got about 20 minutes, so I want to go ahead and get started. When I looked at the temperature below freezing this morning, I thought, thank God this is a fireside chat. but I don't know where our nice fire pit is, Reggie. But no, having this great audience fill the room even on this cold day. Thank you all for being here. It certainly warms my heart. And I think it's a testament to the importance of the topic that we've been talking about today. And it's a testament also to Gracelyn and her team at the Critical Minerals Security Program here at CSIS, the great work that they're doing. I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Eric Paloma. I'm the director of our Hess Center for New Frontiers. My program looks specifically at global macro trends. Mega trends is kind of the term du jour. And we look at strategic foresight frameworks. We look at drivers of change. And twice a year, we host an executive education program called Global Foresight. And I'm proud to say that for the last few years, critical mineral demand has been on our radar as one of those critical drivers of change. And Gracelyn's team's been a tremendous partner. But even during that period, since Gracelyn joined CSIS just a few years ago, the narrative around critical minerals has evolved dramatically. Today, critical minerals, it represents the building blocks of the future from just about every single industry's perspective. It could be the future of energy, the future of technological advancement, the future of critical infrastructure, the future of national security. So we are all very fortunate to have with us today Reggie Singh. Reggie is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy and Critical Minerals. And Reggie and his team are responsible for diversifying and strengthening the U.S. critical minerals and energy supply chain, which puts you squarely at the intersection of a lot of the topics that we're covering today. I'll just briefly say Reggie's got a distinguished career at the State Department, over 2 decades of service. He's been around the world, including a few critical minerals hotspots, Indonesia, Eastern Europe, Australia, India, Mexico. So Reggie, thank you so much for being here. I just want to start off by kind of help us map out how we got to this point. 2025 has been a busy year for critical mineral diplomacy. We've seen major announcements in Ukraine, in the DRC. These critical minerals are becoming this kind of pillar of U.S. foreign policy. But 15 years ago, critical minerals weren't getting headline coverage like they are today. So tell us, to maybe start things off, how you've seen critical minerals evolve to become this pillar of U.S. diplomacy over your career, and why it seems to be having such a moment at the negotiating table today.
Well, thanks for that framing, Eric. It's useful to look back over my career and see how things have changed. As you mentioned, I had served in Australia and Indonesia previously. About 15 years ago, I was actually posted in Australia, and this was around 2010, 2011. I remember Washington asked me to go in and see the CEO of a mining company called Linus at the time, and I went in, talked with the CEO. He was showing me little, glass vials of powders and saying, "These are rare earth elements. They're not so rare." We were very interested for really just a moment in time, and then we sort of lost interest, dropped the ball, so to speak. And about 15 years later, we are now in this quandary where we realize that our strategic competitor has essentially built an infrastructure of critical minerals over the course of a generation. And so it really hit home with the export controls, but it's to some extent we had inklings of this, we saw it coming, but it really took almost a crisis to drive it home. And so now, as you probably can tell from the program today, there is strong bipartisan support for fixing this issue, but the Trump administration in particular has really accelerated the pace of change in this area, particularly in the last 9-10 months. We've seen a huge amount of resources and administration activity go behind efforts to fix this generational problem, which we don't have a generation to fix. What China has built over that period of time, we have to resolve in relatively short time, particularly for the most critical minerals. So, it's unfortunate that we ended up in this space, but I think there is now intense focus and bipartisan support, and this is an area that, regardless of what happens over the next year or two, I think will get sustained attention from government, from industry, and from stakeholders who just realize the importance of these critical minerals to our future success and ability to remain free of economic coercion. And so I think the situation of the past where, we lost interest in this area after a while is just something we won't see anymore. So now the question becomes, how fast can we move along this path?
Yeah, you touch upon the speed and scale of this, but as everyone here knows that, successful critical minerals projects abroad, they depend more on more than just investments in mining and infrastructure, but there's a whole enabling environment around it, from the logistical to the regulatory infrastructure that essentially gives those materials from the mines to the markets. So how is the administration facilitating investment across the entire mining ecosystem in strategic jurisdictions abroad? So how are key projects like in the Libido Corridor and Sub-Saharan Africa advancing?
So when we think about facilitating investment in both the direct mining, the actual projects, as well as the supporting infrastructure, we have to think about the environment in which that investment takes place. It is essentially taking place in a non-market environment. So, China's ability to price shape, to drop the prices of certain minerals, to invest behind their companies, whether they're SOEs or nominally private sector companies, shapes the scene upon which we're trying to operate. And so we can't just have our private sector investors just go in without support. We essentially have basically a four-pillar approach to both the mining investment and the infrastructure that will go to support that. One way to think of it is actually one central pillar and three supporting policies. And the central pillar of what this administration intends to do is support investment in mining and mining infrastructure to diversify our critical mineral supply chains. But how do you support that central pillar of investment from these longer-term issues of not having a sufficient ROI because of what China does? How do you sustain it through a very long investment cycle? And so that's where the three supporting policies come in, and they generally go around. The best way to think of it is you're protecting that investment. So these three supporting policies include, for example, stockpiling. So there was $2 billion in the Big Beautiful Bill that the Department of War can now add to its national stockpiling. That can act in a counter-cyclical way when prices and minerals drop. Perhaps the stockpile can acquire certain minerals. So we're at a very nascent stage of how that might look, but that's an example of how you can protect an investment. Then you can have price support activities, whether it's, you had MP Materials on earlier, and they talked about their deal with DOW. That's an example. Price supports. There's other examples you could put under that umbrella of supporting through price dynamics, the investment. And then the last item to support investment, the last supporting pillar, so to speak, is permitting reform. That's mainly a domestic effort here in the US. You saw the executive orders that President Trump signed earlier this year intended to speed up the permitting process. You've heard the figure about 29 years for a mine, et cetera, in the US. So by all means, there's a strong domestic effort to do that. That said, we're also talking with key partners about permitting reform in their jurisdictions as part of our dialogues, just sharing best practices and encouraging each other to think strategically of how permitting reform can support the investment case, right? If you have lower lead times, your potentially your ROI, your net present value for certain mining projects could go up if you're reducing it from 29 years to whatever. So in general, that is our approach, and that extends as well to the infrastructure space like Libido Corridor. And you know, we intend to stand side by side with our companies globally as they, particularly as they operate in high-risk jurisdictions, to provide them the diplomatic support, the high-level political support, so that they have a sort of a fair table on which to arm wrestle, so to speak.
Now, you mentioned that China has kind of a generational lead on us in this regard. How are these public-private partnerships that you're describing, how are they countering China's Belt and Road Initiative in their infrastructure investments in places like the Global South? How can the U.S. offer a better model of cooperation?
Right. So whether we're talking about the supporting infrastructure or the actual mining projects, I think the U.S. and certain of our allied Western mining jurisdictions, the Canadas and Australias and the UKs of the world, and in the midstream processing space, you know, Japan and Korea. I think what we all have that works to our advantage, as opposed to maybe what our strategic competitor has, is some brand equity that really has a powerful pull in a lot of developing countries where a lot of these critical minerals are. You know, if you look at Africa, without naming particular countries, they went all in on investment with our strategic competitor over the past generation, and they now have seen the downsides of that. So they have an impetus as well to diversify, but on their side, it's diversifying their inward investment. When they interact with the Belt and Road Initiative or with mining companies, Chinese mining companies, there tends to be less local value add. There's, in many cases, workers are imported at all levels of an organization. And, there's a lack of local beneficiation. Often it's just the crude minerals that are being exported. When you talk to Western miners, in many cases, even the small and mid-cap miners, you'll find that there's an ethos of doing the right thing from the beginning. We meet with lots of companies, my colleagues in the interagency and we at State, in our normal sort of weekly work. There's constantly companies coming in to see us, talk to us in the upstream and midstream, in certain cases, the OEMs as well. But the consistent feel I can get from this, and not to be too glib, but it actually it's surprising. There is an ethos of doing the right thing, because these companies realize they are operating for a long time in these countries. They want to do the right thing, and if they do it in the right way, they'll tend to have better relationships and less friction with governing jurisdictions. So that, in one instance, immediately works in our benefit, just our private sector, the way they operate. But then when you overlay the desire to be closer to the U.S. politically and diplomatically in many cases, that provides extra leverage. And so I think just taking a more strategic approach of supporting our private sector with diplomatic and political leverage. Hopefully will provide an alternate sort of model that benefits a country more than our competitor.
Great. And you touched on this a little bit. Let's maybe drill down a bit. So this year, the administration signed just a flurry of bilateral MOUs with countries ranging from traditional partners like Australia and Japan to new strategic partners like Saudi Arabia or Kazakhstan to kind of strengthen the critical mineral supply chain and cooperation. Why do you think this effort is gaining so much traction with partner countries now? And what does a successful bilateral critical mineral partnership look like over the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Good question. The MOUs are, in a sense, the starting gun for what we hope will be a deeper cooperation. So we've negotiated a number of MOUs that you listed out. We have at least a dozen more that we are discussing that I don't think have been made public yet, but are in various stages of discussion with countries around the world. And the main sort of strategic impetus behind these is to build this ecosystem of private sector investment, of supporting private sector investment amongst all our countries that we're signing these MOUs with, and then supporting them with various policy tools. Now, in some instances, every country might not agree with every aspect of all the tools that we have before us, but I can tell you in these discussions there is a sense of the approach of attracting investment, private sector investment, and then protecting that investment from non-market policies and practices. I think there's wide agreement on that. And so these MOUs provide a starting point for negotiation or for further discussions and for further policy coordination. Probably the one model MOU out there that is the one that is probably most replicated in our discussions is the one we signed with Australia, that President Trump signed with PM Albanese a couple months ago. And if you look at that MOU and the provisions in there, there's some key aspects that we hope to replicate in additional MOUs that we sign with countries. So there are references to approaches on pricing related to what I discussed earlier. There are clauses about asset sales, which is another concern, right? We've seen instances where small companies, small Western mining companies invest a lot of money. They find a resource. Over years, they do drilling, they go through pre-feasibility studies, they go to FID, and then they run out of money. And then in many instances, you'll see a Chinese company come in and swoop down and buy them at a very cheap price. So that's an additional concern that we want to figure out how to address that particular challenge. So that may be an aspect of discussions once these MOUs are signed on how we might coordinate with countries to try to forestall those cases.
Great. All right. Now with our last 30 seconds, the lightning round, because my program is so focused on the future and how you apply long-term thinking back to today. What should the U.S. government prioritize next year in 2026 to secure the critical mineral supply chain?
I'd probably cite two things. So these MOUs, getting these signed, and then taking the next step. Like I said, they're really just, they set the stage for deeper cooperation. And so in 1Q26, perhaps we'll get more of these signed, and we'll have a critical mass of countries where we can coordinate some more policies with them. So we'll have to watch that space, but it will be exciting in 2026. The other aspect is, state doesn't have a lot of money to invest, but a lot of our partner agencies do, including others who've talked today, including our ECAs and DFIs. So you had XIM and DFC earlier, and we coordinate closely with them. So working with the interagency to actually get actual projects across the finishing line, and whether that's MP or more recent deals that you might have seen news stories about, actually getting those projects moving, I think sends an important signal to the market that we're serious and that there's serious money behind this effort, including a lot of money from the BBB that was signed earlier this year. So yeah, I think I'd cite those two as important signposts.
Well, we wish you luck in the new year. Please join me in thanking Reggie Singh, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. And now we're going to bring Graceland back up for our next panel.
And I am delighted to start our fireside with Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada. Please welcome her with a round of applause. Senator Cortez Masto is the senior senator from the state of Nevada since 2017. She's the ranking member for the Subcommittee on Public Lands, Forests, and Mining on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator Cortez Masto sits on the Senate Finance Committee, where she has oversight over tax and trade policy, Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, and the Indian Affairs Committee. She previously served as the Attorney General of Nevada. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. And thank you for all the good work, by the way. I love what the Senator's doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's been a busy year. I think we can both appreciate that we're all due for a good Christmas break.
I think you're right.
So I want to get started. I mean, why is it so important for policymakers to be focused on strengthening U.S. critical minerals security?
Particularly at the federal level, because I think we have to set the path forward. I think it is so crucial, and particularly, let me just say, at a federal level as well, as the government that should be a part of this public-private partnership, but blazing the trail of where we want to go in the 21st century in this space, and get out of the idea that we just think like 2 years ahead. Every cycle is a budget cycle. That's all we think about. We've got to be thinking long term. And this is a great area for us in the United States to set the tone, to set the parameters, guardrails, the paths to say this is where we want to go as a country, economically, for our national security, for so many reasons, but we've got to be a part of that conversation. I think it's key.
So what's happening in Nevada? I mean, Nevada is extremely mineral rich. There's a lot of activity happening. It's really a hub and an epicenter of progress domestically. And we sometimes get bogged down into things that don't work, the permitting, the slow movement of capital, the long project development. But what is happening?
Yeah, let me just say, before we leave today, if we don't get to talk about it, permitting, streamlining permitting, still fighting for that. Hopefully that gets done. Not going to let it get off the table. So know that, and we can come back to that and talk about it. And this is one of the reasons why. Nevada is what, if you all know, anybody here from Nevada? I'm curious. Do we have anybody from Nevada? Any of our industry out there? So Nevada is a mining state. That's how we grew up. Remember the Comstock lode, silver, gold. We are a mining state, and we have not stopped. We've slowed down a little bit. We have new technology that can take us in a direction that also helps us be responsible landlords of the public grounds, right, of land, and remediate it. But we need to continue down the path of mining, particularly around critical minerals and rare earth minerals. I mean, it's common sense. We see what's happening around the world right now. Nevada's a great place that's primed for it. Most people don't realize in Nevada, over 80% of the land is owned by the federal government. So that is our partner. That's who we have to partner with when we are looking at how do we use this land, if there's going to be mining on that land, or is it more conservation, or is it for economic development, or is it for population growth, whatever you need. And so there's always this partnership. But in general, based on the geology of Nevada, it's great for mining. It's great for mining. And it's created incredible jobs. It's grown our economy. And we have now, and people know this, the opportunity with the new technology to mine in a responsible way. Now, the challenge we have, we've got some almost 20 minerals that we're mining. Some of it is lithium. We have one of the first lithium mines in the country. We have a second one that's going up at Thacker Pass. And I think you're going to be talking to somebody, MP Materials, if you haven't already, that's just over the border in California with rare earths. But there's so much more potential there. When it comes to mining, my goal is we want to do that, and we want to continue to expand where we can in the United States and with our allies. But we also need to bring processing back. That's my other focus in Nevada, is how do we used to process the minerals that we mined. We need to bring that back to the United States. We can do some of that in Nevada, and that's what we're looking at, particularly with lithium mining.
So I want to come back to something you mentioned about permitting. How do we accelerate these timelines? It is the critical bottleneck for projects in the U.S. The average time it takes to develop a project here in the U.S. is almost 50% higher than the rest of the world. What are we going to do?
Oh, it's ridiculous. So I sit on energy and natural resources. Last year we had this very a conversation about mining. And I think for people, some of my colleagues who are not familiar with mining, and I'm going to give him credit for it, though he stole my idea, was Senator Barrasso. We were having this idea about mining, and I said, I want to bring in the room charts to show how long it takes just to get a permit. And he literally brought, because my Nevada Mining Association has this chart. You walk into their office and they show you how long it takes just to get a mine. It's absolutely ridiculous. Years. And so he brought that into energy and natural resources to give my colleagues who aren't familiar with mining an understanding of how long it takes and why it is so devastating to these projects to take that long. Because of that, because of the hearings we had in energy and natural resources, we actually passed out of committee permitting reform legislation to streamline it, to streamline those time frames, understanding that this is where we need to go with this critical mineral mining, rare earth mining, a lot of the stuff that we need for our technology of the future, and we need to focus on streamlining the permitting for those projects. So we passed the legislation. Unfortunately, it didn't make it out of Congress and over to the president's desk. My hope is this Congress, we continue down that path. We've already done it once out of energy and natural resources on the Senate side, and we bring it back. We're already having those conversations right now. I know some of my Republican colleagues are just as interested as I am in getting this done.
We had our opening fireside this morning with Jared Agan, the executive director of the National Energy Dominance Council, and he very much echoed the importance of permitting reforms and judicial review. So are you optimistic that we'll get it done by November?
Of next year, or November, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic. I'm never going to put a time frame on something because otherwise I'm from Vegas, I'll lose. But I will tell you this, I am optimistic that there is really an effort, and we all realize we have to do something. And we have a great product that we all can start from last Congress. And so if there's the appetite, which I see on both sides of the aisle and in the White House as well, I think we can move it forward.
And it's interesting is also our financing colleagues have said, how much more investable is a project if you know it's not going to take 25, 30, 35 years to get across the line?
Well, and I think that's what people forget. It's not just getting the project done, not getting through the environmental reviews, getting the financing together. If you don't have a timeline, you're going to lose some of your investors. You're going to lose that investment moving forward. And we are going to lose out on these projects here in the United States, and they're going to go somewhere else. I'd rather them be here. And that's why a lot of the work I did on the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure was to actually make the federal government a partner. We should be a partner, public-private partner, and back some of these mining companies and the new technology and the projects that are happening. We should be involved. Look what China's doing. So, and part of this was, we've got to be able to compete with China. Otherwise, we are going to lose out when it comes to bringing mining here and expanding our mining and processing. And by the way, we need to find those countries who are allies of ours that we can continue down this path. I will get into that, but that's part of the legislation that I introduced with Bill Haggerty. I think you're going to be talking to him as well, that we have introduced together.
I actually want to come back to that legislation now. So you've passed you've been behind some of the most bipartisan minerals legislation that has been introduced. You have the Restoring American Mineral Security Act with Senator Hagerty. You have the Rare Earth Magnet Security Act with Senators Mullen and Graham. How do these pieces of legislation position the United States to better compete globally?
Oh my God, we would, not only would we better compete, we would lead. And this is driven by, for my purposes, this is driven by my conversations with my companies in Nevada. But also, I've had the ability to travel on some of these codels. I've been to Africa, right? Last year I was in Africa. I was in Malawi and Zambia and Botswana, Angola, and we had these conversations about their critical minerals, what opportunities, if we have allies, that we can partner not only on the mining of these critical minerals, the processing of these minerals, and the technology that it's going to bring us. As you well know, it's for our economic development, it creates jobs and our national security. I don't have to tell all of you, China's cornered the market, right? They manipulate the market, because they've cornered it with critical minerals and rare earths, they manipulate the market, and they manipulate the price. Oversupply, you name it. We've seen it for the last 20 years. The only way we're going to get out from underneath that is to start doing some of that mining and processing here. We can't do all of it. And finding our allies who are willing to partner with us to do the same thing, thus the legislation. The legislation that Bill and I put together was to create sort of this kind of mining security alliance, which was if you're a foreign country and you want to work with the United States on mining, right, and processing, and actually also focus on some derivative products like batteries and magnets, then you can partner with us and we will zero out the tariffs, but you got to work with us on increasing the prices against China and those foreign countries that are not going to be working with us. The idea is to build out those allies. At the same time, with some of the mining and the money that comes into that, we put it into a trust fund. And that trust fund goes back into this whole process of mining and processing and moving forward. And we work with Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and the Development Finance Corporation to continue this path, to continue to grow our opportunities, not only here in the United States, but with our allies. That's the intent. And part of that is also making sure Congress is in the role. So there's the legislation pulls Congress into this conversation with the trade representative, but it goes back to the very first conversation we had. It sets a structure that the United States says, this is important for us. This is the future we want to go. And we're going to now go down this path with our partners, public-private partnership, with foreign countries, with those who want to be part with us. Because if we don't lead and have a vision for that and what it looks like, we are going to be left behind. Now, I was just having a conversation with one of my staffers who are they're brilliant on this subject. And he's right. Right now, the United States is stumbling in that direction. They're stumbling. So we need to put structure around it so everybody knows what are the rules of the road here, where we're going, and we can start building it out. That's the intent of this legislation, and that's why, for me, just fighting for it and trying to have hearings and talking about how Bill and I can get hearings on it on the Senate side. It was just introduced on the House side as well, but we need to have more conversation in this space.
This is a big deal. Now, how do we then better align with the executive? The executive and Congress, we all want to go in the same direction. We recognize the same problem. In fact, minerals are one of the only real bipartisan issues that exist in this town at present. How do we better align our efforts?
Well, here's my suggestion. We continue to work with those in the administration that see what we're trying to do here and build out those relationships and make sure they understand that just one branch of government moving forward is not going to be as successful as if you had both the executive and Congress. That's what you want, right? Because I don't know about all of you, but when you travel abroad, it's not just the executive branch that people are paying attention to, and rightfully so they should, But they pay attention to Congress. We set the tone. We pass the legislation. We appropriate the funds that are going to go towards some of these loans for these projects. So it is important that you have both pieces, both the executive branch and congressional. And the only way I know how to do it right now in this environment is to find those individuals within the administration who understand that as well and willing to work across the aisle to get it done.
And I think it's also really important to create politically durable solutions. Mining has long been the victim of political football. It starts, it stops, it starts, it stops. So it adds that layer that I think industry really needs to feel confident in the longevity of our efforts. I want to turn back. You mentioned you were in Africa last year, and there's been a conversation about the African Growth and Opportunities Act, AGOA. How do we see ourselves using these tools to advance our efforts in a continent that we have historically not played, like as you kind of said, we kind of stumbled around in a way that is coherent, in a way that is mutually beneficial in deriving economic development opportunities?
Yeah, and I will tell you, I don't have to tell you all of you, and it is a challenging time. And this is a conversation that I have had with our ambassador for trade. When we, as a country, let me take AGOA or even USMCA, and we have negotiated this, and we've set parameters around it, and we work within the confines of that structure. That brings that stability and certainty for folks and industry and others and other countries. That's what we need to do. But when that structure is not there, the stability is lost, and then you have what you have now, the administration making decisions, going out and entering into an agreements that most of us, I haven't seen the fine print on, I don't know. That's chaotic, there's no stability there, and that is a challenge. So my conversation with the folks in the administration is we need to bring that certainty and stability. We need that structure, not only for industry, but for our allies, our partners, other countries. And we have to work within those confines. It is a challenging time, we all know that, but there are some of us that are still willing to do that. And I think we have to show that and continue talking about it, the importance of it.
I want to come back home now. What would you say to environmentalists who are just not interested in minerals being mined in our backyard? Because that's one of the challenges we have too.
Yeah, I said it to them. So let me just say this. I've said it very clear. You cannot have solar. You cannot have the electric vehicles and the batteries and the recycling that you want unless we extract the minerals here. So if you want to move in that direction of clean energy and opportunities technology is going to bring us to reduce our carbon footprint, it does start with the mining and processing of some of these critical minerals. And we can do it here, and I say this, in Nevada, in a responsible way now. Technology gives us the ability to actually mine the land in a responsible way so that we have the ability to remediate it, to protect the environment, whether it's the ground, the groundwater, or the air, and still partner with all of the stakeholders. Here's what is key, I think, to getting it done. When we are doing something in Nevada, I'm not going to say there's not challenges there, because there are, but the goal here is to bring all the stakeholders to the table, including the tribes in Nevada, and say, here's our potential, here's what we've got. How many of you, how can we work together? So on some of the mining, you will see there's conservation support it, there's some of the tribes support it, there's local government, there's local stakeholders, local ranchers will support it. Are there going to be some that are going to challenge it? Sure, it's always going to be the case. But if you can get more folks that are behind it, that's the intent. I will say the other thing about this is streamlining the permitting. I do think we have to address that issue as well. That's a key part of it. Otherwise, we're just slowing it all down, and it oftentimes will not get done.
And are there any barriers that you've seen to getting some of these projects off the ground this year?
Yeah, there's always barriers. Here, let me just say this. I think there's opportunities to work through this and continue to move forward. From my perspective, I don't think we do enough when we're talking about mining, particularly at a federal government level, to talk to individuals who are concerned about protecting the land. I do think what we say to them is, no, I want to protect the land. I think there should be environmental reviews. but not to the extent that they are stopping the projects unless their projects are not appropriate for that piece of land. But there is an opportunity to work together to remediate it, protect it for the future. There's a lot of litigation going on. I get it. I'm an attorney. I respect that. I respect the litigation that is happening, and that's individuals' rights. But I think we can work at a federal level so that we're not adding additional barriers that don't make sense. We can still do the environmental reviews, but they shouldn't take 10 years. Right? We can streamline certain things so it doesn't take too long, but still ensure that we're putting those guardrails, protections in place moving forward. I do think there's opportunities there. And it just requires a lot of conversation. I'm not going to say everybody's going to be amenable to it, but at least you're having those conversations and moving forward. I do not think the federal government itself should be putting barriers in place. We should be trying to figure out how we work with everyone.
And what does success look like for 2026?
That's a tough question. Let me say this. I think success for us, everybody in this room, and for the conversation that we're having today, is that we pass Haggerty's and my bill. We actually, as a federal government, come together, administration with Congress, and say, this is our long-term plan. This is our business plan for the future for the next 10 years. This is where we know we need to go. We're going to put guardrails, we're going to put these parameters, we're going to put this structure in place so that everybody knows. That is success to me. Success is we're all kind of rowing the boat in the same direction at the federal level, and we see that we have to address this issue. If we don't, I don't have to tell all of you, if we do not, we're going to be left behind. It's not just China. We are going to be left behind in this technology race. And it's not just, you all know this, the critical minerals are key, the rare earth minerals are key, but it's AI, it's data centers, it's robotics, it's all of the above. We should be leading. We should be leading in the United States in this space and continue down that path, but we need a strategic plan, a business plan from the federal government to say, yes, that's where we want to go.
It's very hard to execute if we don't have mission clarity on where we're going.
But that's the problem. And that's why I think it has to start with some conversations like we're having here. And for me, working across the aisle with somebody like Bill Haggerty or Mark Wayne Mullen on rare earth magnets and the production tax credit. I do think working across the aisle, introducing legislation starts that conversation, having hearings on it, getting it passed, getting the administration and the White House to say, yep, we support this, we're going to sign on. That's how you kind of bring some clarity and start moving in that direction.
I guess my final question, when I look back, China's had a 30 or 40-year advantage on a lot of these, right? And they went to a lot of these countries to secure those minerals and bring them back home, which has allowed them to have dominance. Do you think it's realistic in the next 5, 10, 15 years that we may see a world where we're not relying on China and don't have China weaponizing these minerals in real time?
I do, but we've got to be out there. Like I said, let me just say, Africa alone was eye-opening. China's there. Every project I saw was the Chinese government promoting it, doing it. If we are not there, if we're not engaging, and we're not talking about how we can work together with these countries, including African countries and what they want, then we are going to be left behind. We can't just say, no, ignore it, or treat them like stepchildren, and no, we don't want it, we don't care, because China's going to do it. I can't stress this enough. That's why as soon as I came back from Africa, AGOA was so important. And it's about the critical minerals. It's about the jobs there. It is about their infrastructure. There's so I have to tell you, Nevada had so much in common with these African countries because they want to build it out. They want to do mining. They want to keep the jobs there. They want to grow their economy. They want to be able to invest in this new technology. They want a grid, an electric grid. So we have the opportunity to partner with them, but we have to show up and we have to engage constantly. Because if we don't, we're already being left behind. The projects, the Silk Road projects, all the projects that China is building there now was astounding to me. Absolutely astounding. And I will tell you These African countries are looking for another partner. They are looking for another partner. But if we don't show up and engage and have these conversations, they're not going to look to us. So yeah, I do think there's potential there. But we've got to take the time to nurture those relationships and really engage.
It's a real opportunity for the U.S. as these countries who have historically had one source of investment and one source of offtake look for new partners. The question is, do we show up? But do we also show up consistently? Because we've also started and stopped a lot.
Yeah, no, we haven't. And that's the challenge you have with the change in administration all the time, right? That was the hope with some of the legislation, AGOA, right? Even when we enter into USMCA, all of these trade agreements, all of these agreements that we have, that the goal is they live beyond the politics of the partisan nature of who sits in the White House, right? Or who controls Congress. That's the intent. And that's the business plan. That's the blueprint for the future. That's why we just cannot give up on it. But those countries, you're absolutely right. They want to partner with the United States. And it's not just the United States. They want the investors. They want the American investors there. But the American investors are not going to go there unless they know there's some guarantee or there's some protections or that the United States is going to be there as a backstop, right? That federal backstop. So we have to be partnering.
Senator Cortez Masto, I thank you so much for your leadership and the way you're thinking about, I think, the systematic architecture that makes sure that this isn't a fleeting priority that passes through 2025, but really ensures that the U.S. can step in with leadership both here and abroad. Please join me in giving her a round of applause.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for what you're doing. So appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
We have a gift for you. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful. This was amazing. Thank you. Nice job, guys. All right, thanks so much for joining us again. And to those of you online, thanks for watching. We are in the final stretch of our afternoon. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a tech spotlight with John Murn now. John Murn is the CEO of Terra AI. Terra AI is a technology company focused on applying artificial intelligence to mineral extraction. John completed his PhD as a member of the Stanford Intelligent Systems Lab, where he researched intelligent decision-making systems for large-scale systems. He has spent 4 years applying these methods to critical resources in academia and now in industry. And it's been amazing to see in a short amount of time how much Terra AI has grown, with a pretty good shout out in the Wall Street Journal this past week. So John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
John, exploration is often cited as a critical bottleneck in mining. Why is exploration so challenging when we talk about minerals as much as we do?
Yeah, is this working? Test. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm glad to have this question because the sessions this morning focused a lot on risk, which is great. It's exactly where the conversation needs to be. But a lot of the talk around how we mitigate those risks was focused on surface risks, offtake, processing, things that happen above the ground. The reality is that the risk below the subsurface is orders of magnitude higher than what we have below ground. Rio Tinto estimates it's 1 out of every 1 to 3,000 exploration projects will actually produce a mine. And the reason for it, and the reason why it's getting harder, is that things are getting deeper. If you look at the way we've developed critical deposits of industrial scale mines in the past, up until about 2010, almost every single industrial scale mine was discovered by surface expression, meaning the ore was actually poking out of the ground. You could see it on the surface. But from 2010 onward, the majority of industrial scale discoveries for metals like copper have been found entirely below ground. So what that means is that the explorer's job becomes both harder, slower, and more expensive. Now, couple that with the fact that in order to actually take a discovery to a mine, you have to be able to map exactly what and where your ore is. Now, that is a process that means you have to be able to map out a complex 3D structure under a kilometer or more of rock. And as we've heard today, head grades at mines are getting lower, which means the production that we're having to exploit is getting lower and lower concentration. So that means you have to be able to map out ore bodies in more precise detail at lower grade, at bigger and greater and greater depths. All that means is that you have this kind of confluence of challenge. Things are getting deeper, they're getting harder to measure, but at the same time you need more precision in order to actually get your project across the line.
So we're talking a lot about minerals and how much we need of them for data centers and AI, but how do we use those technologies to address our kind of minerals vulnerabilities and finding these minerals?
Yeah, I think AI has the potential now to do for the mining industry what simulation did for the oil and gas industry in the past century. And that is take it from an industry in the exploration side in particular that is very human-driven, very intuition-driven, and very much in its sort of wildcatting phase, and bring it into a phase that is much more scientific, much more predictable, rigorous, and therefore lower risk. Every single exploration project that makes it to a mine has a model today that was drawn by hand by a geologist. Every single geological hypothesis was conceived by a team of people relatively from scratch. And what this means is that every project has a mountain of idiosyncratic risk and a lot of time has to go into it. What AI is fundamentally good at, and actually I'll just stop and just get on my high horse about AI here for a second. There's a lot of different types of AI here. There's the LLMs and the language models that everybody in this room has probably seen or even used, but there's a lot of domain-specific AI that's been built out in areas like biotech for drug discovery and other areas of AI for science. All of those different methods, what they are fundamentally good at is accumulating massive amounts of data and experience and processing them into a form that's easy to use for some downstream task. So for mining, what this means is we can take learnings from dozens and deposits across a continent and hundreds of or thousands of deposits across the world, put them into one spot so that all of these new explorations don't have to be started from scratch.
And how can AI-enabled exploration give the U.S. a competitive edge in expanding its mining capacity at a time when we're racing to do it, but the gap between us and our adversaries has grown?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why, so there's been a lot of talk about processing and the processing dominance in countries like China. There's also, if you look further upstream, there's this tremendous competitive pressure on securing the mines of tomorrow, on securing exploration assets and things, new discoveries that will ultimately become the Escondidas and the Bingham Canyons of tomorrow. The Chinese are there now as well. They're buying assets earlier and earlier at riskier and riskier stages because they're able to write off losses against their strategic line item that Western companies don't have. We can't just say, hey, look, we're going to lose $100 million on this deal. It's strategically important for the US, right? A small junior mining company can't afford to do that. So the way we use technology is by leveraging it as an offset against China and other adversaries that are able to take those strategic plays. To be successful in mining, in exploration, means being able to identify good projects earlier. If you can identify projects earlier, de-risk them, you can come in earlier, develop them faster, and ultimately open your mines sooner. What technology, and AI in particular, has the opportunity to provide the United States and Western countries is the ability to identify those good projects with more clarity sooner and kind of do the end run around that strategic play. So now it's not, hey, I'm a company and I have to have a strategic reason for taking this outsized risk investment. I have clarity and I can go into this asset with more clarity and the free market will follow behind me.
And should the U.S. be taking a bigger bet on some of these technologies? I mean, it sounds like these innovative technologies are going to be really crucial to closing the gap.
Yes, but I think in a particular way. So obviously, we come from Silicon Valley. There's a rich VC culture out there that helps to finance projects and startups and technology development. What the US government can do that is unique is finance the deployment of these projects, the deployment of these technologies. I'll take the RPE Mine of the Future project as a great example. As an early stage startup in a particularly slow industry in comparison to the speed that a lot of other Silicon Valley type companies typically move at, having the ability to generate results and to get your technology into the field faster can mean the difference between life or death as a company, but also life or death for that technology. So what the US government can and should be doing is taking bets on the deployment and commercialization of technologies. Follow the lead of Silicon Valley and the private investment community, come in then as well, that's great, but also do the thing that only uniquely the US government can and enable faster deployment, broader scale testing and evaluation, and a faster embrace of the technology throughout the industry. Being able to provide things like the Mine of the Future as a testing ground for companies, again, is a uniquely US government thing, and it's absolutely critical for technology companies that want to go from initial inception into scaling out in an industry that is traditionally not going to move fast enough to satisfy most VC investors.
Are you seeing that, are you seeing increased investor appetite for these technologies now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say overall the entire mentality within Silicon Valley and the larger technology ecosystem has changed quite a bit. I think it was Raheem or somebody else this morning that said there's been a very effective rebrand of mining into this critical minerals sector, and it truly has resonated and found it down to even our level, where a couple years ago, if I was trying to recruit somebody for a technology mining company, they would get really excited at first, and then I'd be kind of surprised, and they'd ask, well, is it Bitcoin or Litecoin? And the reality... And then when I told him, no, it's copper, it's nickel, no, thank you. Now, the fact that we are a mining company, we are an AI company doing something real, is actually one of the strongest selling points we have in both recruiting investment and talent. And it's because of the education into the industry of how critical things like copper and all these other various resources are to not only the rollout of AI, but every other critical initiative that people tend to care about. But it's also become a very real, kind of undeniable long-term play. VC investors are like anybody else. They're trying to make money. They are looking for a very typical returns profile, but at the same time, big funds like Coastal Ventures, like Andreessen Horowitz, are looking for a diversification into more durable deployment of AI and technology in general. So yeah, I would say overall that the appetite for investment into this space is growing, but at the same time, the amount of education that's required is getting higher and higher. So the bar to be able to get an investment over the line is, and I think this is a good thing, higher than it was 4 or 5 years ago, but at the same time, there is more capital to be had.
Now, how do you think that this technology can be deployed both domestically but also abroad? I mean, so much, one of our big challenges we have with investing abroad is that they are underexplored, that we don't have good data. And so there's been a significant interest from global South countries in developing out their database of resource data. How do you see this technology fitting into that space?
Yeah, so I think you've seen a lot of countries, commit to investing in their mineral endowment through data collection. In Saudi Arabia, Zambia, many other countries have contracted large geophysical surveys to expand the entirety of the nation. So basically flying fleets of aircraft over the entire country to gather data to better quantify their mineral resource. Now, as we've seen here in the US, and we've seen now in Australia and other places that have digitized data collections, this is a great start. It drives interest and it drives investment into those assets that are easily identifiable from conventional signals. The reality is that even in these underexplored places, we are going to be needing to look deeper. We're going to need to get a clearer picture, and we're going to need to do that faster than we've ever had to do it before. So being able to couple discriminating technology, be it data and analytics and AI or a new sensor modality, in one of those offerings to a nation like Zambia, to say we're not only going to unlock an initial wave of investment and understanding in your country, but we're also going to be able to enable you and those companies that are going to come in and develop these assets to do it in a timeline that's years to decades faster, changes the equation for those countries and the partner companies as well. So overall, I think if I could summarize, deploy it in the undeployed areas, deploy it in the thoroughly explored areas, but make sure you do so in a way where you're going from data to intelligence as quickly as possible so that the companies and the countries that are developing it can act quickly.
I have 2 more questions. So we talk a lot about how the place that we have fallen behind is actually in processing. You hear it all the time, right? It's not necessarily in the geology, but it's where all of the minerals go. How do you see this innovation and what Silicon Valley is doing to change the kind of that midstream segment?
Well, I would argue that as soon as we fix the midstream, we're going to realize we're behind in the upstream as well. But no, I think it's the same story, right? There's an offset advantage here, a potential offset advantage that the U.S. can leverage in innovation and processing. In iron, for example, one of the biggest advantages that China has in producing iron is a very low cost of energy, and they have very large smelters that they can fire up and run for decades. There's a lot of innovation in how we swap out coal-fired, iron refining with hydrogen and electricity and things that we can produce abundantly here in the United States, natural gas, for example. That type of innovation is something that, again, the technology industry on its own can only take so far. It will require a level of state support to generate those early proof points and those early wins in order to get it to scale as rapidly as we need to. But in general, I think there's a lot of different ways that Silicon Valley and the larger technical ecosystem tend to innovate. They do it directly at the problem. They look at, hey, we have a high cost of energy for copper smelting, let's figure out technologies to reduce it. They also do it kind of tangentially by, for example, looking at new materials discoveries, looking at ways they can do supply chain forward design. Let's see if we can design a power grid that uses X percentage less copper. Let's see if we can develop a material from readily mission available resources that can replace some of the magnets as we've seen with BMW, for example. So ultimately in the midstream, I think we're going to see a large focus on energy reduction. We're going to see a large focus on CapEx reduction as 2 of the major focus points for technical innovation coming out of the ecosystem as it currently is.
And how can policymakers and other stakeholders help shape and accelerate innovation? Like, again, we all agree on where we need to go, but it's more of how do we get there? So what does support look like in terms of accelerating innovation?
Well, the fact that y'all know where we need to go is news to a lot of us in Silicon Valley. So I think if you look at the investments that are happening today, you're going to see that the reason that money is being put where it is not necessarily because it's the most strategically advantageous or the highest leverage toward any kind of centralized objective. One of the biggest, I'd say, hurdles to VC investments still is the timeline in this world. A fast mine, really fast, is 6 years. The typical return to portfolio is 7 years for VCs. So your investment has to return the portfolio amount in 7 years. So if we're saying we're going to get one shot on goal in that time, it's a really hard sell to VC industry. So the result is that projects are focusing on things like retrofitting, lower CapEx, processing replacement, things that are fast wins that aren't necessarily going to move the needle the most. So if you're a policymaker or somebody in this ecosystem and you want to influence the way Silicon Valley and other innovation sectors devote their work, I think it's helping to drive alignment on the economics. VCs, like every other investor, like I said, are economic beasts. It's not going to be enough to message policy or to provide pathways. It's going to have to be an alignment of the incentives. So that means helping to de-risk some of the earlier stage risks to better align the returns profile and ultimately timelines with what VCs are expecting. And it also means, again, de-frictioning some of the pathways for these bigger swings. So if we want to reinstate high capacity, high copper smelting capacity in the United States, and we want to make innovation a key tenet of that, there has to be a pathway for risk-seeking entrepreneurs to be able to go out there and test at the cycle speed and at the scale that is commensurate with most other VC investments. You have to remember that we're competing with hyperscalers that can hit 300 million revenue in 2 years. It's got to have a big outcome at the end of the day.
I'm going to ask you to ask me a question in a second. We have a few extra minutes. Senator Haggerty's on his way. What are some questions you wish you had clear answers from? Because Silicon Valley and Washington, and my little limited experience on the other coast, are very different worlds. Where do you feel like there could be better connections? What questions do you still feel are unanswered?
I think I'm going to sort of answer your question. There is a lack, I think, of general understanding of how things at the Silicon Valley scale, so thinking about it from the perspective of a new company or a VC fund, translate into the macro level objectives of Washington, and vice versa, I think. So I take, for example, innovation planning and innovation prioritization for mineral sector. It's not abundantly clear to anybody how innovation in something like exploration and acceleration there would impact the US's strategic priorities, and vice versa. So I would want to, maybe instead of saying ask a question, devote some work into understanding first off on our side, what is feasible to do? What can AI reasonably be expected to do in the next 3 to 5 years in this sector? And then on the other side, understand if we were to solve these problems, what's the impact? If we know the impact there and we know that it's feasible, we're very, very clever at making business models work. There's plenty of companies out there that enter a space that with their technology and a conventional business model would never ever work. But if you are a PhD like me and you spent 6 or 7 years researching some type of hammer and there's no nails around, you'll figure out a way to make that screw into a nail. So yeah, I think there just has to be more of an alignment on the conversation between how the micro interacts with the macro, between the hill and the valley.
That's the most optimistic framing of a PhD I've heard in a while. If you don't have any nails, but you have the hammer for 7 years, what do you do?
Is that the question?
I was just repeating it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think, all right, so that's another point, though, here, is that I think on that same front, there's a downside to that as well, is that you have a lot of people that have hammers that aren't suitable for the problems they want to try to, that folks on the Hill and other places want to solve, but they will pitch it as if it is. This has been true nowhere more than in the AI boom. You have plenty of people that think that their plug-in to their favorite LLM is going to solve whatever AI problem it is out there. And they will spend a lot of time trying to convince potential customers and stakeholders that that's the case. So I think the other side of the coin of how does the US government, how do policymakers truly influence the course of technical development in a productive way is by educating themselves and building out the ability to be as good at diligencing this stuff as VCs, because VCs are going to diligence it from a completely different perspective. But at the same time, they need to bring that same rigor to it if they want to actually kind of move the needle on things that'll matter.
Are you feeling adventurous today?
Sure.
Great. Do we have any audience questions to either of us about things we've talked about today? We've got about 5 to 7 minutes before the senator's here. So we thought we'd open it up to questions. Yes. Can you grab a mic and introduce yourself? There you go.
Thank you so much for this presentation. My name is Antonia Pup. I have a question regarding the framework that was launched by the Department of State, the Pax Silica, as a new tool of, we can say, minerals diplomacy. How do you think technological solutions like yours can benefit from these frameworks in order to make sure that this nexus, AI and critical minerals, really drive AI's America solution forward in the competition with China?
Yeah, great question. The reality is that we could do our job perfectly, and a project can still fail for any number of extrinsic risks. And the reality is that our technology only matters if the projects that we're using to develop it succeed. So things that de-risk these extrinsic risks, be they geopolitical, financial, or otherwise, that ultimately help to leverage up the impact that our technology has, are critical to actually making sure that the value we are creating doesn't die in some middle ground, doesn't reach some valley of death and languish there. And I think vice versa, right? What we are ultimately trying to do is drive more clarity into the subsurface, and there's a lot of companies like us on the AI side, sensors, et cetera, that can be tools for helping to drive more understanding into the actual subsurface resources earlier, so helping to make the conversation around these things more informed.
Hi, I'm Aubrey Ruby. I'm Senior Advisor at the Atlantic Council, but outside of that, I am a GP at a fund, my own fund, and we invest in early stage seed round type projects globally. My question is to see if you can reflect on Silicon Valley structural finance and its application in the mining space, because yes, obviously with an AI tech play, when you're asset light, it makes sense. But some of my friends who've tried to raise along the rising tide and the sexiness of critical minerals have raised rounds, but for physical assets, like asset heavy type things. And now they utterly regret it. For valuation purposes, liquidity purposes, exit, all of that. So maybe just reflect on that, because there's a desire to marry Silicon Valley and the critical mineral space, but sometimes those structures don't match.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think if in some ways it makes sense, right? The returns profile from an exploration project is extremely similar to that of a VC project. You had, on average, 11x your capital if you come in at the early stage and leave at resource stage. And the risk profile is around the same, maybe a little bit worse on mineral side, but the lifetime is what breaks it. You have no signal, it's completely binary. You have nothing until you sell 5 to 12 years later. So the capital is completely mismatched, right? I think that putting VC dollars into the ground should be very sparing. And quite frankly, I think if you're investing in a technology play, which most VC mandates are to invest in underwrite technical risk, it would be very hard to convince me that an asset-heavy business model is the thing that lets you leverage your competitive advantage most, right? If you're going in there and saying, I'm going to develop every project from start to finish, I'm going to do all the undifferentiated lifting required to do that, if I was sitting on the other side of the table, VC-wise, I would say why? Like, if you think your competitive advantage is in processing or in discovery or whatever else, do that. Focus on that. Figure out the model that lets you lever that up as much as possible, rather than just following the kind of model that's handed there in the industry.
Anyone else? Yeah.
The mic in the center.
All right, while I was waiting for that. The executive orders are requiring all the defense primes to, within the next couple of years, to be able to completely demonstrate that they have segregated their supply chains from China. What can AI do in terms of traceability in the mineral sector?
It's a hard one for me, because AI is, like everything else, a tool, and the fundamental input to that tool is data. So there is a human layer to inputting AI into or inputting data into whatever AI process you want to run to trace provenance of materials, for example. So I think it's ultimately, if I had to guess, and this is not my area of expertise, so this is a wild guess, is it's going to become a very useful tool for summarizing large amounts of text data, going through a lot of reports and things like that. But as far as actually ensuring the provenance of materials, my guess is it's still going to be a human-driven activity for the time being. Happy to be proven wrong on that, but it's, it reminds me of 5 or 6 years ago when every VC pitch was blockchain. And I heard, back when I was doing VC stuff at Stanford, I heard tons of pitches of blockchain to track this, blockchain to track that, and where the conversation always broke down was, well, who's going to put the info on the blockchain? Oh, I don't know. So, I think it'll be an accelerating and a force multiplier for whatever group has to do this. But I don't think it's a solution to the problem in and of itself, personally.
The question is for you, Grace, because you asked about what we heard all day today. And what I heard last Thursday, but I didn't hear so much about today, was anything about 45X. Sabanya-Stillwater mentioned it last week. And I think the South 32 mentioned tariffs. So this is not, a lot of this conversation was talking about early stage, but what I heard today is that the government is very focused on financing advanced stage, and how could we kind of level the playing field? It seems like maybe you could ask Senator Haggerty on the 45X and the tariffs as a means to help domestic mining companies and processing have 45X last longer, and maybe address some of those tariff considerations to get some carve-outs.
I mean, I think that's a little bit more of a statement than a question. I think there's broad consensus that 45X should be extended. It's more of the timeline that we do it. Like anything, the earlier you do it, the more continuity and the more certainty you give industry, which is really, really important. Right now, we're looking at 2032, which isn't far away at all when you think about the mining sector at large. I think there's pretty strong consensus. It's just more of in the stack of priorities where it sits, given that's still 7 years away. But I don't think you find a lot of people disagreeing with the extension of 45X.
Yes, question regarding the appetite, the market opportunities for looking at the extraction of critical minerals, but from secondary sources, such as e-waste, industrial waste, wastewater treatment, red mud. Interested to hear also the role of AI for that, but also to accelerate innovation in that space and to accelerate the whole access to the critical minerals we are all looking for.
Yeah, no, great question. I think there's definitely appetite both for the process side. I've seen plenty of investments come through. A lot of the top tier sandhill firms focus specifically on different novel processing techniques, everything from recycling to tailings reprocessing and everything in between. Similarly with AI, one of the things that AI is very, very good at is also scaling up human reasoning to computer speeds. So what typically will happen in processing, let's even generalize this even further to just rare earths, right? If you've been in this space, you've probably heard the phrase rare earths aren't actually rare, right? They're just difficult to process. And one of the biggest sensitivities that folks have to rare earths projects is how long it's going to take them to stabilize their flow sheet. How long is it going to take them to tune and test and refine their refinement process to the point where they have a stable and predictable process flow. AI is being applied in all of these areas. It's being applied in the same way it's being applied to drug discovery and materials design. It's being applied to rapidly iterating on processing. And that's being applied both to the design of novel processing materials or processing processes for tailings and other non-traditional sources, but it's also being applied in very traditional sources as well to try to, again, just de-risk the early stages of production and refinement.
Hi, Tony Carroll with the Mining Indaba. Maybe this is a question that you could ask Senator Haggerty as well, Gracelyn. How do we get over the valley of death that you mentioned in terms of bringing things from design to functionality? And do you see any role of our 17 national laboratories in filling some of that gap? Because I think it's a natural resource that we don't often appreciate.
I'm happy to go for it, but...
Okay, we'll wrap up on this question.
Yeah, sounds good.
Because Tennessee has a very large national laboratory.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've talked with a few of the labs, and I know other folks have as well. I think the two things the labs have right now that are very unique and very underutilized are physical equipment, physical space, and data, and compute processing as well, for that matter. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks don't know it's there. They don't know to go ask it. I think that coming into with a very clear value proposition and de-frictioning a lot of the, quite frankly, pains of working with the government, even labs that are ostensibly designed to move fast and engage with industry. There's the Genesis project at DOE that was recently announced, which is a great example of something I really hope works out well, because its objective is to do just that, to drive alignment and to bring industry into collaborations to help commercialize meaningful solutions.
Thanks so much, and thanks for being a good sport about Q&A on the fly. I appreciate it. Please join me in giving John a round of applause. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome Senator Bill Haggerty to close us out for the day. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to be with you.
It's been a rush.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Senator Haggerty, thank you so much for joining us. I imagine it's quite a busy ending to the year.
It's a very busy time of the year. We're going to pass the National Defense Authorization Act this week. We've got over 100 nominees that we'll confirm. And we might even get on the appropriations bills that have been languishing in the Senate for some time. Hopefully we'll get started on that as well. So we've already got 3 appropriations out of 12 passed. Hopefully we'll get another 5 or so done here in the next several weeks.
So very busy indeed. Senator Haggerty was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2020 and is currently serving his first term representing the state of Tennessee. His committee assignments include U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, Senate Committee on Appropriations, and the U.S. Senate Committee on Rules and Administration. Prior to his election to the U.S. Senate, he served as the U.S. ambassador to Japan, which I'd love to hear more about, given that in many ways we have a lot to learn from what Japan went through with critical minerals.
Well, I'd love to talk about that.
Senator Haggerty, Tennessee is home to quite a number of projects along the mineral supply chain. So we're talking mining, smelting, processing, manufacturing of medical scanners, electric vehicles, and other products. How has China's dominance of critical mineral supply chain and, to some end, their weaponization affected Tennessee in recent years?
Well, as you mentioned, we have several advanced manufacturing industries that are in our state that are dependent on these critical rare earth minerals. If I think about it, some of the most incredible evolution, if you will, in battery technology is taking place in my home state. Companies like SK and LG from South Korea, General Motors, major battery producers that, again, are dependent on rare earth mineral componentry for the magnets and various aspects of their production. We do half of the PET scan machines in America in East Tennessee. Again, a very tiny element, but a very rare element that's only available in China right now. But at the same time, we're making real strides to make a difference today. And perfect timing, by the way. Korea Zinc just announced a super smelter project in my home state of Tennessee. Close to $7 billion will be invested to make a super smelter there that will address a significant component of our rare earth mineral dependency. Not only zinc, but germanium. Over half the nation's requirements for germanium will come from Tennessee once this is done.
That's a big deal because China cut us off of germanium, and germanium is crucial to our semiconductor industry. By extension, all electronics as we know them. What steps are you taking to address this challenge, both for Tennessee but broader U.S. security?
Well, certainly I've been active in the recruitment of companies like Korea Zinc, meeting with them, encouraging them to come to our home state. There are many reasons why they've done it, but that's a project that I think we're going to see come to fruition very quickly. Again, the financing is in place. I work closely with our friends at the Pentagon, the Commerce Department, the U.S. federal government is taking an important role in this project. And we've got the right environment in Tennessee, so permitting will not be a hurdle the way it has been in the past. Financing is in place. That's quite significant. And most important of all is we're creating an environment of certainty. Like, I was a business person my entire life, and it is very difficult to navigate when you don't have certainty that there will be demand. I think what the investing public can see right now is that the United States is going to stand up to the unfair practices that China has demonstrated. I think you know how they've played. China has tried to corner the market on rare earth minerals. How have they done this? By unfair practices, whether it be subsidies there at home or by dumping on world markets to keep us from producing. That's coming to an end. And our trade representative is working carefully right now. They're doing the study as we speak to determine what tariff rates might apply, and also to build an alliance of partners that will be able, partner countries, I should say, that will work with us, that will partner with us in an environment where we have aligned 301 tariff posture with respect to China. Also, no tariffs for the production of critical rare earths in any of our countries that cooperate.
What is the competitive advantage that Tennessee has? What are the policies that are attracting large-scale investment?
Great leadership. That's, but in all seriousness, that actually is, present company excluded. We have had great leadership over the years that have produced a business climate that has been very positive. We have a low tax rate, no tax rate for individuals, but a low tax rate, a permitting environment that is conducive to actually making investments. And Tennessee's location actually has been a great advantage as well, just because of our location and our ability to access large parts of the U.S. market. And when you get to specific industries, you think about what's happening at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is in East Tennessee. It's the most complete, most extensive national lab that we have in the United States of America in terms of the various verticals that are touched at Oak Ridge National Lab. We have the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the largest public utility in America, again, based in Tennessee. So if energy is a critical component of what you want to do, particularly if it has a nuclear flavor to it, you want to be in Tennessee to address that. And if you think about the mindset of our leadership, Tennessee has been forward-leaning. We have turned the state around in the course of a little over a decade to become, from an average performer to becoming a lead performer in terms of attracting foreign direct investment, creating new manufacturing jobs, advanced manufacturing capabilities. And we continue to focus on our human capital as well to make certain that the universities like my alma mater, Vanderbilt, University of Tennessee, Tennessee Tech, Chattanooga, that we've got great resources across the state, Memphis, that we are working together arm in arm with industry to make certain that we're delivering the talent that's going to be necessary for the future.
So I want to zoom out a little bit. As mentioned, you were President Trump's appointment to Japan as ambassador during his first term. Japan, in some ways, had a 15-year head start in some of these efforts because they saw how acutely painful it was to have rare earths weaponize them back in 2010. What can we learn from Japan's response to what happened 15 years ago?
I might take just a minute to explain what happened 15 years ago. Back in 2010, China, which continually does this, China was encircling the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, harassing, making it difficult for the Japanese to utilize those islands that they have administrative rights over. One of the Chinese trawlers actually struck a Japanese self-defense boat, a Japanese Coast Guard boat. And so they brought the captain in. And China's response to that was to withhold critical rare earth elements. They demonstrated to Japan, they demonstrated to the world, frankly, what they were willing to do. They were weaponizing access to these elements even 15 years ago. At that point, Japan was over 90% dependent on China for rare earths. Japan went right to work looking for new sources, new partnerships. They very quickly have reduced their dependence to below 60%. Still a lot more room to go, and I think that's why Japan is a prime target for us to cooperate with as we look for ways to collaborate with other nations, other allies, to address this rare earth mineral shortage. And I think we'll see a lot more cooperation from countries like Japan, like South Korea in that process.
Can we unpack that more? What do you think the role of our allies in the Indo-Pacific is going forth on critical minerals?
Well, I think we're all subject to the same issues. And if you look at our allies' investments, both Japan and South Korea have made considerable investments here in America. I have been involved for the past 4 years in what we call the Trilateral Executive Dialogue that brings together CEOs from South Korea, from Japan, and from America to focus on technologies, opportunities for economic cooperation. We call it economic security, because economic security and national security, frankly, are quite aligned. And we just had our last event in October of this year in Tokyo. We had about 40 CEOs there, perhaps 60% of South Korea GDP represented, a large number of Japanese CEOs as well. And we were talking about, again, ways to align our market. So think about this, harmonizing standards, harmonizing regulations, for example, to make greater economies of scale available to all three nations. Greater cooperation, greater collaboration at a time when China is putting increased pressure into the region. The United States has played a pivotal role in this. There are historical reasons why it has been difficult, I'll say, for Japan and South Korea to cooperate and collaborate. That was the impetus for me really pushing for this trilateral executive dialogue. Again, not the politicians, but the business people who see the long-term strategic need here. But it's working both at a commerce level and at a political level right now. And I've been very encouraged by the political relationship between South Korea and Japan, how it has improved. I think leaders in both nations realize it's in their interest to cooperate and collaborate. And I think the United States has played a critical role and will continue to play a critical role in binding those interests in that region to stand up for freedom, for liberty, and to not allow our supply chains to be weaponized the way they have in the past.
Senator, you spent most of your career as a businessman and investor. You know, one of the challenges that we face in the mining industry in this country is the economics of it. How do we, at a time when China has kind of dominated overproduction and forced prices down, how do we get our Western companies to succeed? What is Congress doing to address these problems in terms of prices and encourage more private sector investment in these crucial supply chains?
Well, we just passed a major bill, some call it the Big Beautiful Bill. It's a bill that really is designed to support and facilitate more capital investment in America. In fact, it's the greatest capital investment thrust that we have ever seen. We've made America the most desirable place in the world to invest. Within that bill, there's $8 billion to support critical rare earth mineral industry here in America, to get that to flourish here. And we will work with our allies and partners to do that. Senator Cortez Masto and I have legislation right now that we're pushing forward, and we just got it picked up in the House of Representatives today, I think, where we will move forward to find allies that will work with us and really try to reach across the entire globe, if you will, to find allied partners that will work with us on rare earth minerals.
Am I right in hearing that minerals aren't a U.S. or allies, but a U.S. and allies solution?
That's exactly right. And we have the capacity here. Just in my home state of Tennessee, if you look at the rare earth minerals charts, we either can produce or already are producing 18 of those. Now that we've got, as I mentioned, Korea Zinc coming in, we've got processing capacity. For zinc, we've got processing capacity. For silicon, there's much more that can be done, but we have to have a new mindset with respect to permitting. Again, the United States has been a hostile environment for any type of smelting operations up until now. We've got to change that mindset, find the cleanest and most efficient way to do it. But we need to be processing here in America. That has been the weakness. Today, you've got producers of rare earths in Tennessee. You can mine it in Tennessee. They have to send it to China to have it processed before it comes back. We're going to change that dynamic, and we're working here very fast to do that.
looking ahead, what would you like to see Congress do to enhance both its mission clarity and its execution of this area? I think generally speaking, there's alignment between the objectives here between Congress and the executive. We need more resilient supply chains. We're lucky to work on one of the areas that's bipartisan. There's not many anymore. So what does it look like in terms of what Congress should be doing going forward in this space?
Well, I think if you look just at the legislation that Senator Cortez Masto and I are working on in terms of restoring American mineral security here, that is bipartisan legislation. I think we're going to have great success with it. And you're right, there is a real alignment because we can all see the national security implications. You don't have to look far. China just reared its head and withheld critical minerals from us. President Trump just met with Xi Jinping at the end of October of this year to address this, and I think he's addressed it on a near-term basis. But long-term, the way to address it is to create the capacity here in America and with our allies, and that's not something that's missing on either side of the aisle in Congress. So there isn't a great alignment. You've got an administration here, and I've got to take my hat off to Steve Feinberg, who's the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Steve gets this, and they are working night and day very hard. In fact, one of the guys on his team called me last Saturday. I was in O'Hare Airport. I hadn't talked to this gentleman for some time, a friend of mine from Wall Street. And I picked up the phone and how are you doing? He said, I'm here at the Pentagon now working with Steve. I'm handling the structuring of the Korea Zinc deal. And we went through a long discussion about that. So we're bringing Wall Street talent to bear. We're helping facilitate, I think, a very rapid progression toward independence, if you will, on these critical minerals. And it's that type of business perspective, that type of can-do-it attitude coming from the executive branch that we need to be supporting in Congress. And I get a lot of positive feedback on both sides of the aisle that we want to do just that.
And how do we ensure, one of the things I've said a few times today is mining tends to become susceptible to a game of political football, and that's why we start and stop projects in this sector. How do we create a layer of durability around the solutions that we're developing to ensure that we don't stop again?
Well, I think one thing that you're seeing is our U.S. Trade Representative taking a very deliberate and positive stance. The biggest issue is demonstrating that we will stand up to China. And again, that is being supported on a bipartisan basis. If we're not going to do that, any investment is susceptible to, again, further subsidization, Chinese suppliers coming in, trashing the market, selling below cost. That's been the pattern in the past. And these rare earth minerals are often very low volume. I think our total consumption of germanium in this country is, 20 metric tons a year? That's not a lot. You could put it on this stage. So we need to be creating an environment of certainty. And I think that message is coming across loud and clear that we, meaning as a nation and with our allies, do not want to be in a situation yet again where we can be held basically hostage by anybody, and certainly not the CCP when they decide to exercise the strength that they have right now. So that's why we're moving as rapidly as we are. And I think that delivering that certainty is perhaps the most important element of what we can do.
Because if we give them the certainty, the investors will come. It's the uncertainty that makes investors a bit skittish.
And that's coming from my, decades of experience as an investor. That's what you need. It's not subsidies. It's not anything. It's not government involvement, but it's certainty that the opportunity will be there and it's not going to be taken from you by a malign actor like China.
Do you think we need to be spending more money to meet our mineral security needs?
I think the markets can dictate that, but if you look at demand for these minerals, you see that they play a very critical role. Tell me what device doesn't have magnets in it today, and you can begin to project what the future is. Businesses are much better at doing this, by the way, than governments. But again, providing the certainty will allow those projections to take place, and if they know that they've got a clear runway to compete, I think we're going to see great things.
Any other thoughts on what we should be thinking about for 2026 and what success looks like?
Well, I think you should look for more positive announcements. Korea Zinc, again, is a terrific announcement that just took place today. Again, another major investment, $6.6 billion. I'm certainly pleased that it's coming to my home state of Tennessee. Again, the federal government has been involved, the state government has been involved, and I think what we do is send a message, and Tennessee can be an example of this, where you have a state that has created an environment that's conducive to attracting these sorts of businesses, where rather than permitting becoming a hurdle, It's going to become an enabler. And we're creating the certainty that's necessary here in America because we're willing to stand up and defend our interests finally. We're creating a certainty that businesses, that investors can look at and say, yes, I can see the long-term future here and I can make the investment here in America. And if you look at what we're doing from a trade standpoint, we're putting together partnerships. Those conversations are happening right now. Where can we cooperate? Where can we collaborate? And where can we align our approach to adversaries so that we create our own marketplace, tariff-free, where we have larger economies of scale available and more incentive to produce these rare earth minerals ourselves.
Senator Hagerty, thank you so much for joining us. I think this has been a phenomenal close, and I think Senator Cortez Masto was here earlier, so we heard from her a little bit more about your efforts, and really grateful for your bipartisan leadership in this very, very important space, and we look forward to what 2026 brings.
Thank you. All the best. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a real pleasure. Merry Christmas. Take care. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. And there are drinks out back and snacks. Please enjoy your time, and thanks again, and don't be a stranger. Take care.